A quick introduction of myself and the reason why the Broncos lost the Super Bowl. All these things will be discussed on this episode of the Scott Stedman Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Scott Stedman Podcast. My name is Scott Stedman, thus that podcast is named after me. And before we begin in the topic today about talking about the Super Bowl and why the Denver Broncos lost the Super Bowl, I want to give a quick introduction of myself. I actually started a company called Theology and Backgammon about in the mid-2000s, and it was me and a buddy, Ryan. We decided to do blogging, and we could write about anything that had to do with theology and even some fun stuff like little quirky things that we'd like to write about. And it wasn't until about 2007 that we got into podcasting. And we did podcasting for a good number of years and eventually just kind of died out. We both were students in seminary, and obviously, once we graduated, we got jobs, and we have just been very busy and have not been able to connect to actually do a podcast together. Thus, we disbanded the podcast section of Theology and Backgammon and rebranded as the Scott Stedman Podcast. And really what this podcast will focus on, it will focus on some theology, some religious aspects of it with spirituality, faith, and Christianity. And who knows, maybe I'll start talking about some other religions too, deemed appropriate with what's going on within the culture and within the world. But the other thing that forms me is I'm also a counselor and I'm also an entertainer. So a lot of what makes me me is not only my faith, but just my love for the mind and psychology and learning as much as I can and even counseling clients on a regular basis. And also just being into entertainment, from watching movies, doing film studies, even all the way to just acting, writing, directing, whether it's on the screen or on the stage. I just like to have my hands in everything that has to do with entertainment, and I will kind of discuss a little bit about that. So some of you, if you happen to stumble on my podcast, welcome for listening, and others of you, you're probably listening to this because you subscribed to the Theology and Backgammon podcast years ago, and you're now listening to me talk, which is okay, because we have used the same RSS feed for Theology and Backgammon as we're using for the Scott Stedman Podcast. So it's just been rebranded. So if you're already subscribed to Theology and Backgammon, you don't have to do anything. You will start getting the Scott Stedman Podcast delivered to you regularly whenever I post a new podcast. All right, so that's enough about me. I think I talked too long about myself. I know my wife tells me I talk about myself all the time, so I definitely need to stop it. So let's talk about the Super Bowl. So, for those of you who have watched the Super Bowl, that was on Sunday, February 2nd of 2014, some of you probably were not expecting the game that you witnessed on that day. I know a lot of media outlets were talking about, okay, you have like the best offense versus the best defense. Even at the beginning, they called the Seattle Seahawks the Legion of Boom versus Peyton Manning, because Peyton Manning is always praised for his ability, how he can work an offense, and how he's able to get stuff done on the field. So when I'm watching this game and realize that the Broncos were just not playing what everyone expected them to play, with all the turnovers, even at the very beginning when it was the missed snap and that caused Seattle to get a safety. That was very odd to see. And usually when you see something like that, you're like, okay, when Broncos get the ball again, we're going to go and see Peyton Manning, and we're going to see the Bronco offense do their thing. And it seemed like every time they touched the ball, Peyton just could not do his thing. And I even dubbed it on my Facebook page. I even dubbed it as, this is probably the worst Super Bowl I have ever witnessed. And I remember Buddy said worse than the Broncos not the Broncos, excuse me, worse than the Bills and the Cowboys. And I vaguely remember that game because I was young, but at least with that game, it seemed like there was at least something to root for. It seemed like, the Bills would just keep going. They would keep progressing on the field. You were getting excited for them, and then something would happen, and again, Dallas would capitalize on the mistake that the Bills would make. Where this one, it just seemed like the Broncos couldn't get anything going, and they didn't get anything going until almost, I can't even remember, either towards the end of the third quarter or the beginning of the fourth quarter is when they finally actually scored. Like, it was bad. So when we look at that game, most people go, well, what happened? And even the spectators and the announcers, they're just sitting there and they're talking like, well, we didn't expect this type of game to be played today. So what happened? Well, first of all, we have to obviously understand something in the psychological factors, and we have to understand what trauma is. Now, trauma, according to the DSM definition, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and that's usually what counselors use to navigate mental illness. And the definition of trauma is a stressful event outside the range of normal human experience. Now, in this case, possibly, with the DSM's definition, as far as the players, probably not. They're probably doing everything else. But I think for everyone else, it was very stressful. You're in the Super Bowl. It's a lot different than just playing a regular season game or the playoffs. I mean, it's like if you win, you get the trophy. If you don't, all that work that you did, you just go home empty-handed to get to that point. So a very stressful event, a lot of nerves on the field during that game. And then there's a couple of other definitions. And actually, I like Scare's definition. It is, what our culture defines as normal may in fact be traumatic. So again, what we thought was normal would probably be the game moving back and forth, doing good. Just like a regular game where it would be a close game, maybe a few margin points. But it wasn't. It was a complete blowout. So it was just very odd. Now, there's a lot of different types of trauma that happens. And this is actually kind of labeled in, there's a lot of different books out there and authors that you can read about trauma and the different stages of trauma. The reference I'm going to be using is from Dr. Terry Wardle's book, Strong Wind, Crashing Waves. Now, there's a type A and a type B trauma, and a lot of that has to do with early childhood development. And basically, type A is neglect, or what they like to call, or like what Dr. Wardle likes to call, wounds of withholding. So, child wants something, they have a need in that stage of life, and as a parent or as a caregiver, you do not give them that, so you kind of neglect it. And then there's type B, which is getting what a child does not need in early development of the stages of life. So if you do not give it, so basically you're giving a child what it doesn't need in its early childhood, and that would be along the lines of abuse, and we would call that, or Dr. Wardle would call that, wounds of aggression. And obviously other things would be criticism, abandonment, obviously a death, rejection, or even a divorce at a young age. That could be cause a traumatic event in a young child's life. However, there's three other types of trauma that happen outside of early childhood development. Type C would be like an event trauma, which would be watching someone die or getting into a car accident. Type D would be type of a betrayal of an abuse of power. That would be like somebody who's in an authoritative figure is abusing their power and it's hurting another person. One of the reasons why in the counseling field, why people lose their license because they sleep with their clients is not necessarily because of them sleeping with their clients or the sex. It is an abuse of power. There's a client-counselor relationship that's a sacred relationship to help with the growth. And by sleeping with your client, you're basically abusing your power because it's just such an emotionally, mentally attached field that the leader, the counselor, would have to basically know when to call it off and say, okay, it's getting to the point where there's these strong feelings and reactions coming up where a relationship outside of the clinical office could happen. So basically, it's an abuse of power when a counselor sleeps with their client. And then there's the type E, which is called sustained duress. And Dr. Wardle likes to call this the water torture trauma. And that's how the Super Bowl, the game we saw at the Super Bowl this year, that's the type of trauma that I'm going to focus on today, the sustained duress. So let us look at what happened during the game. Very first thing, Broncos have the ball. Peyton is standing behind his offensive line. He's getting ready. He's talking. And you see his head's turned over to the left while he's talking. Next thing you know, the center hikes the ball. And I remember it was quite comical seeing this in slow motion because you just see this ball fly over Peyton's head. And he turns. He sees the ball at eye level. And he has this look of shock on his face. Which obviously with that missed snap, it ended up Seattle capitalized on that, which gave them a safety and possession of the ball. So then the next thing we see is the Broncos get the ball again, and they're kind of going down the field. I'm not really sure the events, what happened, but it seemed like, either they didn't get the fourth down or it was fourth down, so they had to punt it away, or I believe that there was another turnover. So obviously it seemed like any time, at least for that first half, from the first quarter to halftime, it seemed like any time when the Broncos got the ball, they couldn't get a first down or there was a turnover. So obviously, if we look at the water torture of trauma right there, this sustained duress, this type E trauma, is that you have this event of the missed snap. And it's very traumatic. Obviously, you're in the game, nerves, and it seemed like, when you saw Peyton talk to his center afterwards, we don't really know what they say. Maybe we'll find it out when we get like the Super Bowl DVD when they actually have the microphones real close to them so you actually hear what they're saying. But it seemed like kind of given Peyton Manning's character, he probably was just like, hey, it's just nerves, don't worry, it's okay, just shake it off, trying to get his team to kind of say, okay, guys, just shake it off. We can do this, don't worry, we can do good. Once we get the ball back, we can go and we can make a run. So you get that encouragement. You have like this down moment, but then you have this encouragement, this sign of hope. And then next play, another disaster, another type of, the ball gets turned over. You don't capitalize on fourth down. Seattle gets the ball. They are able to capitalize anytime when they get possession of the ball. So all the way up in the halftime, you just had this beating almost, this type of water torture of trauma, just beating these guys up. So then halftime comes and Bruno Mars is singing his songs and the Red Hot Chili Peppers are jumping up and down on the stage. And in the back room, the coaches are saying, okay, guys, you know what? We're down, but that's okay. We're only down by 20-some points. It's okay. We can easily go back and still take control of this game. We can still win and get back in this game. So probably the team's like, okay, we can do this. So then, beginning of the second half, third quarter, they kick the ball. The ball goes all the way down the field. And then what happens? There is a return all the way back for a touchdown. And at the party I was at, the comment was made, well, there's nothing like returning a kickoff all the way back for a touchdown to really take the wind out of your sails coming back from the half. And sure enough, whoever said that was right. They were right because there has always been this constant beating and pounding on the Broncos side. And we always like to look at football as this physical game, but really football is an emotional game. It is a mental game. And if you keep getting pounded and you keep having these turnovers and you keep experiencing these losses and there's no gain, and you look at the scoreboard and that scoreboard's always there and you just see like, okay, we are at the fourth quarter and there's no way we're going to win this game. Like, unless by some miracle there is no way we are going to win this game. So you just have to get to that point where you're just like, and of course some people were saying, and I didn't see this because obviously I'm too busy watching what's on the field and not really what's happening in the crowd, but there were reports that people about the third quarter were giving up and leaving the game. Now, you're paying big money to be there at the Super Bowl. You are paying thousands of dollars to sit at that game, and it's the third quarter, and you just get up and leave? I mean, how does that mess with your psyche if you're a football player, if you're the Broncos and you're sitting on the bench and you just start seeing people leaving in the biggest game of the football season and everyone is leaving? I mean, that is, again, that's another, that continual pounding of trauma, that sustained duress that we keep seeing. So we can look at that game and we could say, oh, well, they should have been playing better. And, this is Peyton Manning. What was going on? But if you look at the game from a psychological viewpoint, I mean, it was very easy for these guys to fall apart very quickly as they did. Now, one of the things that trauma happens is not necessarily the event or what's happening, but usually trauma, especially when it affects someone's life and it's something that they have to go seek help, like professional help for, is because there is a lack of an empathetic witness. And one of the things we know about football players is that they never smile. We never see a football player cry or looking sad. And we usually never see anyone going over there consoling them, too. And sure, Peyton Manning might have said to his center, hey, it's okay, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. But again, you have a lot of players on that team, so you can't have an empathetic witness, especially if it's just one person. And I'm sure the coach is probably just like yelling and going, guys, what the heck's wrong with you? Come on, guys, we're in the Super Bowl. You could play better. You're probably having all these comments. And, of course, there's also the inside where that little voice in your head is just beating you down too, which continues with that trauma. And, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know what's going to happen to the Broncos. Are the Broncos going to, they'll have a whole entire until next season to regroup, to restructure, to really kind of get over that loss of the Super Bowl and try to make another run for the Bowl in 2014. And, it very well could happen. But, I mean, I'm just curious, and maybe this is a prediction, so write this down, and we'll see if this is right when I listen to this again and see what happens in 2014 season. But I bet you next year we're going to see a different Broncos team, and it's not going to be that they're going to be on fire or they're going to be a good fighting team. I believe that they're still going to have that, they're still going to have that mentality in their head that we just got our butts handed to us at the Super Bowl by the Seattle Seahawks. Not that Seattle was a bad team. They were a very good team, and they played very well, and I'm just very impressed by what they did on that field. But even when they come back at the 2014 season, you really are going to hear the media and the sports announcers and the newscasters goes, okay, let's see what these Broncos could do. If you remember, folks, this was the team that lost 48-8 at last year's Super Bowl. Like, it's always going to be on the back of that mind. It's always going to be a mark on that franchise. So it's, again, there's still going to be that trauma. And what we can do is we can let that affect us, or we can rise above it and make sure that, hey, guys, you know what? Yeah, that Super Bowl was really crappy. I didn't play my best. I know everyone else didn't play their best. And you know what? I think a lot, and even not even that, I think a lot of them really did play their best. Like, watching the Broncos play, besides the mishaps and everything else, they played really good. And I can even remember sometimes when Peyton would throw the ball and a receiver would catch it, half the time they stand in the middle of the field, and I don't think it was like, oh, my goodness, I caught a ball and it wasn't a turnover. But I think it was more like where every time when they catch the ball and they turn, there'd be 5 Seattle Seahawks that would like close them in. And there was nowhere they could run, so they either would try to gain like maybe a yard or two by running forward and then get hit and go down. Like it was, yeah. So it was a very good game and a very good effort on Seattle's part. So we have to see that hopefully they review the game and they say, you know what? Even though that was what happened in the past, we will not let that define us for who we are in the next season. And once all the players and the management and the coaches can get that in their head, I believe that the Broncos could go on and have that good season. But if they allow the constant media pressure, and even players might be talking smack on the field and saying, hey, how's that 48-8 game? You're not that good. That keep beating. And if they allow them to get into their head and do that, then I'm sure we'll be seeing a very weak Denver team coming into next season. So again, that's something that we would have to look and see until football season in 2014. And that is about all I have to talk about today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for actually tuning in and listening to the Scott Stedman Podcast. I hope to have more podcasts regularly, and I can't wait to be putting more stuff out. And again, if you like what I have to say, or if you just want to make a comment about anything I said on this podcast, you can email me. It is Scott, SCOTT, _, and then Stedman, STEDMAN, @about.me. So, Scott _Stedman @about.me. Feel free to email me. Tell me if you like the show. If you disagree with me, I would love to hear those too. And I will try to write you back and discuss anything. And even if you have any questions about faith, counseling, or even entertainment, I would love to hear all of that because, again, that's what makes me unique. And I would love to hear everything you guys, any questions that you guys have to say or any comments you'd like to throw my way. Again, thanks for listening, and I will hopefully be back in the near future. All right. Have a good day. Bye.